Hey, this video will talk about solving equations with variables on both sides with no distribution. The last part of that title, the no distribution, just means that we're not going to have to deal with any parentheses in our equations, which is good. Otherwise, what we're going to have is an equal sign with expressions on each side of the equal sign, and there will be variables or letters on both sides of the equal sign. If you're kind of new to algebra and you haven't solved any equations at all, I would go back and look at some of my videos where you just have the variable on one side of the equation. Start with one-step or two-step equations. You can Google it on my channel if you want, but that's probably the best place to start off until you kind of get in the flow of things. As we go through this, I'm going to kind of just show some notation that I use as well as what I call good housekeeping, kind of keeping track of what you're doing. I talk about this a little bit more with my more beginning algebra topics, solving equations, so I'm not going to go to super depth, but I will be using them. So our first equation that we have is negative 2n plus 20 equals negative 4n. And what I encourage my algebra students to do is to kind of what I call build a wall through the equal sign. There's a couple reasons why I do this that I'll probably mention as I go through it. So our first goal, since we have the letter n on both sides of the equal sign, it is sitting here and it is sitting here, we need to get all of the n's on one side of the equation. So we're going to cross the wall with one of the equations. Since this side here only has the negative 4n and nothing else, we're going to bring the negative 2n over to it. So the negative 2n is technically subtracting 2n, so to bring it across the wall we need to undo that, so we're going to add the 2n. What we do to one side, we have to do to the other. And again, this line that I just wrote, if you're kind of a novice, make sure that both things that you wrote match. Plus 2n on one side, plus 2n on the other. Good, you know that you're good to go. When we go to simplify, negative 2n plus 2n goes away. That goes to 0 n's. So we're done with n's on that side of the equation. We copy the 20 because we haven't used it yet. We copy the equal sign. And now we figure out what negative 4n plus 2n is. And that's going to be negative 2n. So we're successful in getting our n's on only one side of the equation now. If you look over here, there's no n's. It's just a plain number. So on the right-hand side of our equation, we still have an n, and we want to separate it from the negative 2. The n is multiplying with the negative 2, so to undo that, we are going to divide. All right, and notice it's a negative 2 that I want to get rid of, so I'm dividing by a negative 2. What I do on one side of the equation, I need to do on the other side. Now I need to do this math. 20 divided by negative 2 is going to give me negative 10. Copy my equal sign. These have canceled out, and now I'm done with my problem. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Our equation is 10 plus 3n equals n minus 10. So again, I'm going to build my wall. I'm going to rewrite this a little bit bigger, and mostly just so that I can talk about this. Where I have a plain n, this here, I am allowed to put a 1 in front of it. I'm not saying n equals 1. I'm just saying that I only have one n there. And I'm just making it really obvious to myself so that I know what math I can do with it. All right, so once again, we have n's on each side of the equation. And I kind of figure that this is a point where a lot of algebra students are like, I don't know where to start this. So we need to get the n's on one side. Where do we start? Well, I have a rule of thumb. It's kind of not politically correct, but I say pick on the little guy. We have a 3n here. We have a 1n here. The little guy would be the 1n. So I'm going to make that one go across the wall. The 1n is positive, all right? This here, this negative sign is attached to the 10. It doesn't have much to do with that 1n. The 1n is positive, so I need to subtract the 1n. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Again, I'm just kind of making sure that they match what I wrote. And now I'm going to rewrite. I bring the 10 down because I haven't touched it. 3n minus 1n gives me 2n. I go across the wall. My n's have canceled out because 1n minus 1n is 0 n's. And I have a negative 10. Again, that minus sign is turned into a negative sign. It's married to the 10. I can't just get rid of it. So our task is complete as far as getting the n's on one side of the equation. That's perfect. So now I'm going to remove this 10. All right. The 10 is positive, which means it's being added. So I undo that by subtracting. I have to do that on the other side of the equation as well. On the left-hand side, my 10's cancel. Still have a 2n. I still have an equal sign. And negative 10 minus 10 is actually negative 20. Don't go too fast with that and just see, like, here's 0 in your head. And then our last step is to get the n by itself. So we have to remove the 2. which means that we're undoing multiplication. We undo multiplication by dividing, and we have to do that on both sides of the equation. So n is going to equal -10. If you want to check your answer, you can go back up to the original equation and put in -10 anywhere that you see an n. So if we have 10 plus 3 times -10, that has to equal -10 minus 10. So let's do the multiplication here first. 10 minus 30 equals, and then on this side, let's just subtract. If you're at -10 and you go backwards 10 more, you're at -20. Now we have the subtraction to do on the left-hand side. 10 minus 30 gives me -20. And I can see that I have -20 equaling -20, so I have done that correctly. All right, fresh start here. Let us build the wall. And again, this is very similar to the first problem we did in this video. We only have an x on this, so I'm gonna keep that planted. I'm not moving it. I'm gonna bring the other x term to it. Okay, so we're gonna pick on this 5x. We are undoing the addition by subtraction. 9x, sorry, minus 5x, now that's a big mess. 9x minus 5x gives me 4x. I'm only left with a 12 there because that's canceled out. My last step is to remove the 4, so I'm undoing multiplication, which means I need to divide. Divide on both sides, and 12 divided by 4 equals 3. Those go kind of quick. The thing that's a little tricky is just that you have to kind of be aware that you only have an x term or variable term there, so keep that one planted. If you start moving that one around, a lot of students get kind of mixed up because they're not sure what is here anymore if you move that 9x. So I would just recommend trying to be aware. Do you have x's on both sides? Yes. Is there only a letter on one of the sides? And just kind of process that. All right, last problem. I'm going to build my wall. I do have variables on both sides, but I have more than just variables on both sides. So I have an x plus 1 here. I'm going to look back at my notes, and that should actually be x plus 8. So I apologize. I think I wrote that wrong when I pre-set up the problems. All right, so this is actually the problem that we're going to solve. Okay, so again, I have x's on both sides. Before I go too far, I am noticing that I have some like terms to combine. On this side of the equation, I can't combine the 8 and the x. But on this side of the equation, I do have two plain numbers, a 9 and an 11. They can combine, and 9 plus 11 gives me 20. And I'm just copying everything else. All right, so I'm going to pick on the little guy of the x terms and make that move. Again, what I said on one of the earlier problems is we're allowed to put a 1 here. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to move that 1x and bring it to the other side. The 1x is positive, which means it's being added. So I'm going to subtract it to bring it across the equal sign. If I subtract 1x on one side, I have to do it on the other. Now we are rewriting 8 equals, bring that 20 down. And now 4x minus 1x gives me a positive 3x. The x's are successfully all put on one side of the equation, so that's half the battle. Now I'm going to move the 20 over across so that it can join the 8. We're going to start pushing numbers away from the x now that they're all on one side. The 20 is positive, so I'm going to subtract it from both sides. It's going to cancel out on that side. 8 minus 20 is a negative 12. I still have my positive 3x. Almost always the last step on these is division. I won't say always because that's not true. So we are undoing the multiplication by dividing. And negative 12 divided by 3 gives me a negative 4. And that will be my final answer. All right, I hope this helped when how to solve equations when you have x's or a variable on both sides of the equal sign. Thank you.